Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us here today for this discussion about disinformation and the pursuit of truth in journalism. My name is Daniela Mello. I'll be your moderator today. I am a political scientist, a proud New Bedfordian, and I am also a member of a group of local people who are creating the New Bedford Light, a nonprofit, community-driven, free digital newspaper that will bring independent, fact-based news coverage to the greater New Bedford area. Today, in partnership with the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, we are absolutely honored to host the accomplished activist, journalist, and author, Charlayne Hunter-Gault. In today's discussion, we will benefit from Ms. Hunter-Gault's extensive experience to delve into the challenges that local journalism and its readers face in an era of easily spread misinformation. In the first part of our event, we will welcome three invited members of the Greater New Bedford community to offer questions. They will be the journalist Jack Spillane, Mandy Costa, who's Assistant Director in the Department of Labor, and Sarah Weisberg, a graduate student at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth. We will then open up the forum to questions from those in attendance. You should probably see at the bottom of your window, a window that says chat. That's where you would submit your questions. I'd like to thank the teams at the New Bedford Light and at UMD that have helped put this event together. I'd also like to thank you, those in attendance, especially if you're in attendance again, for your interest and support for community-based journalism. And we hope that you'll encourage your friends and family to support us as well. We will now hear briefly from David Gomes at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, and then from Jeannie Costa, who will offer a short biographical sketch of our very accomplished guest today. So without further ado, I now welcome David Gomes, Chief Diversity Officer at the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth.
Thank you, Daniela. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for inviting me to say a few words on behalf of UMass Dartmouth. As the old saying goes, delay does not mean deny. Again, my name is David Gomes. I am the Chief Diversity Officer at UMass Dartmouth. First and foremost, I'd like to extend my thanks and appreciation to the New Bedford Light for bringing us together for this important event. Everyone at UMass Dartmouth is excited about your organization and our new partnership together that will benefit not only our students, but our entire community. This afternoon's discussion with the esteemed journalist and civil rights activist, Charlayne Hunter-Gault, could not have come at a more appropriate time. We have seen just how far disinformation can push our society to the brink. Whether it's at the highest national stage, within a city, or on a college campus, we need to rely on truth to inform our decisions. The thing about truth is that it needs to be obtained. We need to investigate. You can tell me that the sky is blue, but I'm not going to say that's true without first looking up. I hope that through discussions like the one that we're about to have this afternoon, and through education and community-focused news, we can all be active participants in championing truth, justice, and progress in society. Thank you.
Thank you, David. I hope you can hear me. I had a short connection issue, but I think it is resolved. I would like now to welcome Jeannie Costa, who is former civil rights officer for the Department of Social Services, board member of the New Bedford Light and the New Bedford Historical Society, and she'll provide us with a brief biographical sketch of Charlayne's life and work.
Thank you, Daniela, and welcome everyone. Today, I am honored to introduce one of my sheroes, Charlayne Hunter-Gault, who is an award-winning journalist with more than 50 years in the industry, extending her work at various times to all media. She is the author of 4 books, the latest one, an ebook called Corrective Rape, which details the devastating way some men in South Africa attempt to correct gay women's sexual identity. To the Mountaintop, My Journey Through the Civil Rights Movement is a historical narrative for young readers grade 9 and up, published by the New York Times and Roaring Brook Press. Her other 2 books are New News Out of Africa, Uncovering the African Renaissance by the Oxford University Press, and In My Place, a memoir of the civil rights movement, fashioned around her experience as the first Black woman to attend the University of Georgia in 1961, along with Hamilton Holmes. And since that time, the academic building has been renamed the Holmes and Hunter Academic Building. In 2005, Charlene returned to NPR as a special correspondent after 6 years at CNN's Johannesburg Bureau in Chief, as Bureau in Chief and correspondent. She joined CNN in 1999 from National Public Radio, where she worked as the network's chief correspondent in Africa and was awarded the Peabody in 1998 for her coverage of the continent. Hunter Gault worked for 20 years with the PBS Hour, alternately as a substitute anchor and national as well as international correspondent. As she has now returned to the NewsHour as special correspondent during an unprecedented special series, called Race Matters, focusing on solutions to America's enduring race problem. She began her journalism career as a reporter for The New Yorker, to which she still contributes to. She then worked as a local news anchor for WRC TV in Washington, D.C. Later, as the Harlem bureau chief for the New York Times. Her numerous honors include a New York Times Publishers Award for a story she worked on, detailing the life of the youngest victim of a heroin overdose in 1970. Hunter Gault also has won 2 Emmy Awards and 2 Peabody Awards, the first for her work on apartheid's people, the second for her work in Africa for NPR, in which, according to the Peabody citation, she demonstrated a talent for ennobling her subjects and revealed a depth of understanding of the African experience that was unraveled by Western media. Over the years, Hunter Gault has been a recipient of numerous other awards for her work. And in August of 2005, she was inducted in the National Association of Black Journalists Hall of Fame. In 2014, she received the Black Enterprise Legacy Award. And in 2015, she was honored with the Washington Press Club Foundation's Lifetime Achievement Award. And that same year, she was also inducted into the Atlanta Press Club Hall of Fame. Hunter Gault is a sought-after public speaker and holds some 36 honorary degrees. She is married to businessman Ronald T. Gault and has 2 adult children, Susan, who's an artist and singer, and Chuma, an actor and a director. So before I say welcome on, I want to say happy first day of Women's History Month and happy birthday, Charlene Hunter Gault. Greetings, my friend.
Well, please allow me to extend my happy birthday as well and welcome you once again and thank you. It is really a great privilege for the Greater New Bedford community to be able to hear from you today on this very important topic. And would you like to say a few words before we get started?
I just want to say how excited I am to be with each and every one of you, because you all could be in the same position I'm in to be answering these questions. And I've learned I've got a couple of Pisces like myself, David Gomes. And so we have a certain kind of connection, but I'm just thrilled to be a part of an organization that is concentrating on how best to inform people in local communities. And so I don't want to take up a lot of time, because as any of you who really know me well know that I could go on and on and on right now, but just to say how honored I am to join you at this particular moment. We've just finished Black History Month. We're entering Women's History Month. And I'm hoping that organizations like yours and people like you can, I'm going to say something now a little bit controversial, but I really do hope that with the kind of work that you're doing, we don't have to have a Black History Month. We don't have to have a Women's History Month, because Black history and women's history and all of the history of all of our people will be every day. And the kind of work that each and every one of you is doing, I think is gonna make that a reality, I hope, in our lifetime.
Let's hope so. Thank you. I'd like to open with a big opening question that relates to our topic for today. So please bear with me for the question. The founding members deemed freedom of the press so important as to include it in the first article of the Bill of Rights. Yet in recent years, the press has been the target of numerous attacks, often designed to erode the trust between citizens and the press. We have also seen over the past 3 decades the progressive demise of local news. So the question I have for you as an opening question today is actually a 2-part question. In the first one, I'd like you to tell us a little bit, reflecting on your experience, what do you think that local community news organizations, such as the New Bedford Light, can do to gain or regain the trust of our communities? And the second part, which is a related question, what advice can you offer readers to help them sift through good and bad information? Or perhaps another way to think about this is, how can readers burst out of their information bubbles on social media?
Wow.
I know, big questions.
That's a big question. And if I were in college, that would be my dissertation. I would be working on my PhD trying to answer that question, because as simple as it sounds and as beautifully as you put it, it's complicated. Because in the first instance, I think that we have not had enough of our history, period, not just Black history, not just women's history, but American history. Because one of the things that we would learn if we had been properly taught our history is that a lot of the challenges that we're facing today, we've faced before. And sometimes they've been worked through. I know that when I was in college, one of the ways that I kept myself busy and involved in journalism, which I was studying at the University of Georgia, is that I would go home on the weekends from 70 miles from Athens to Atlanta. And I worked with a startup newspaper called the Atlanta Inquirer. It was started by a professor by the name of Carl Holman and Julian Bond, who probably got more attention in terms of fame than Carl, although Carl was a great person and well known. But they started that newspaper because neither the white newspapers nor the one Black newspaper, which was reliant on its white advertisers, were really covering the Atlanta student movement. And the Atlanta student movement were young college students, and this is 1961, who wanted to bring about change in the Southern system of separate and not equal. And so they were out demonstrating. And so Julian Bond and Carl Holman started this paper called the Atlanta Inquirer to cover the activities of the students in a way that nobody else was doing. And I got to participate primarily by coming back to Atlanta, the 70 miles on the weekend from Athens, and going to Carl Holman's basement. The students would demonstrate in the daytime, in the morning, get arrested by noon or 1 o'clock, get bailed out later that afternoon, and then they would come to Carl's basement and tell their stories, and I would write them down. And that was how I got started. But the point of that is that we've been here before. And some of the people who are fueling dislike of the media are not new. We've been here with them before too, and we've overcome. So the point is that if we continue to do the kinds of things that you all are doing with New Bedford Light, and some of the other local newspapers that are local media, not necessarily newspapers, but information things that are being used these days, which is not always newspapers. But we can overcome because we have the history that says if we stick to it and believe in it and practice what we preach, we can overcome. And we have challenges, no question about it, because I think that the success of the phrase fake news has been so devastating to our profession. And it really annoys me when I hear my colleagues who are very professional and very good, but they use the term and they don't like it either. So why even use it? Even when you're criticizing it, you know what I'm saying?
It's become normalized.
Yeah, it becomes normalized. So I think that that's one of the battles that we still have to engage in, and also have to figure out how we can support local community institutions like the New Bedford Light and others, because that's the current pandemic, among other things like Google and Facebook, have wreaked havoc on our news institutions, on our newspapers, and our overall media. And so people have kind of many people, shall we say, have gone away from the traditional sources of news. So we have these challenges, but maybe it's the way I was brought up, but I was brought up in a community of faith. And my faith that has endured all these years, that enabled me to have this 79th birthday 2 days ago. My faith has seen me through many challenges. And I just would like to, even if there are those who are not necessarily people of faith, take it from one who is, that you'll be all right, but you got to work at it. You can't just sit back and complain about it.
Well, it sounds to me that to take a lesson from the civil rights movement, right, we shall overcome, seems to be your message, right? And that this moment is surpassable.
Yeah, but it's challenging because a lot of the young people, for example, so many of them, too many, haven't been taught our history. I did one, you mentioned, Jean mentioned the Race Matters Solutions thing I did. And one of them was about local news and how, they're just not able these days to really perform for the communities. And yet there are those who are trying, like you all are trying. And so I just think that whether you're a person of faith or just a good human being, you got to figure out what your role is in helping us move along on this journey towards a more perfect union.
That's a wonderful message, I think, for us to open up to the three community members that the discussion to the three community members that that have joined us here today. So I'd like to invite first Jack Spillane, and let me just introduce him very briefly. Jack Spillane is a career journalist in community newspapers. He worked at the Standard Times in New Bedford for 21 years. Congratulations. Serving as a reporter, columnist, news editor, and editorial page editor. He's working with the New Bedford Light, with the group. He's working with us, developing the New Bedford Light. Jack, you have the floor for your first question for Charlene Hontergold. You are muted, Jack.
How's that? Is that better?
Perfect.
So I'm honored to be on the same panel with you, Ms. Hontergold. I'm truly humbled. I'd like to ask about whether we've had disinformation before in American history. Would you feel that journalistic depictions of African Americans pre-civil rights era qualify as disinformation? Things like the lost cause to describe the Civil War, or separate but equal to describe Jim Crow. Seems like that this approach of disinformation may have been seen before.
Well, they might not have. Thank you, and nice to meet you too. And congratulations on your career. Sounds like it was really wonderful. I guess you could call it that. I mean, it was just bad information, and information that, like we have today, we have information that confirms sometimes the bad information that people get about others. And so that's not new. I mean, you can label it anything you want. You can label it disinformation, but I'm not quite sure. And I'd like you to tell me if it matters what we label it, as long as we label it information that was bad and that was not helpful. Because I think that, as we're seeing today, there are news organizations or ways that people are communicating. I wouldn't necessarily call them news organizations, but that conform to certain stereotypes about people. And unfortunately, there are people who only look at those, get their information from those organizations or whatever you want to call them. And I think that that's one of the things that you may have retired from what you were doing before, but I think people like you can't stop. You have to keep on keeping on, because you have to come up with ways that we can help people who are focused primarily on things that are information, if you call it information, that are affirming their own views of things, and their own views can be so wrong. And I think that's one of our big challenges today. I was discussing this with my husband earlier, because I sometimes walk in the kitchen. We have 4 televisions all over this place. And sometimes I walk in and he's listening to a channel that I normally don't listen to. And I'm not going to mention any names, but I say, "What are you doing listening to blah, 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 blah?" And he says, "Well, I just want to see what other people are thinking." I said, "Well, you know what other people are thinking." He said, "No, but you need to listen." And he's absolutely right. He hasn't convinced me yet that I have to listen, but I think it's important for us to try. People like yourself and others on this program have to figure out how it is that we penetrate the disinformation, that's our term today, how we penetrate it, and how we get people who are so focused on one channel of information to listen to some of the others and maybe open up their minds. I think that's one of our big challenges today. How do we get to people who are only getting their news through vehicles that conform to stereotypical views that they have? That's a big challenge for all of us. But I work on it, and I find it interesting and sometimes painful. I just did one of my Race Matters series that Jean referred to earlier with Dr. Ronald Crutcher, who is the president of University of Richmond. And he has a great book out called, what's it called? I Didn't Know You Were Black, or Nobody Told Me You Were Black. I think that's the title. He'll kill me if I didn't get the title right. I'll get it right. But he talked about the importance of bringing people together with different points of view, and how sometimes it's very uncomfortable, but you have to do it. And so I thought that was, it sounds really simple, but I think it's a very profound thought. How you organize groups of people, or doesn't have to be large groups, but people who don't think the same way you do about issues. How do you talk to them? You got to, otherwise, where are we going in this country if we can't figure out how to bring together people who have different points of view. And part of it, I think, is education. I referred to this earlier with Daniela. We've got to educate our children, because while our children get their information at early ages from their parents, I think sometimes if we teach our children right in our schools, they can educate their parents. And I think the point is we all have a responsibility to try and deal with this situation where so many people are stuck in their own stereotypical views of others, and that's got to change.
Yeah. But how do you break through when someone is labeling it fake news? I know that my recollection is fake news was originally used to describe the Russian campaign to plant fake stories in the American media during the 2016 election. And Trump took it and made it his own. How do we break through to get people to talk together?
Stop using the term, for one thing, and get our really highly respected journalists on highly respected stations to stop using it. And to also, when you have the time, point out who else is using the term. Every authoritarian in this world has glommed on to that term. And let's talk about who's using it without using the term. Everybody will know what you're talking about. Like, there's certain politicians today, you don't have to use their name like you just did, but but you could give reference to them. And here's the funny thing. I was talking to somebody about how our former president got so much support. And I think that the so-called respectable, responsible news organizations that are still doing a good job debunking a lot of the BS that is coming out from various places, but at the very beginning, we're giving the former president free rein because he was fun. They didn't think he was serious. They didn't think he had a chance in H of getting support to become president of the United States. So even our responsible media outlets, which are now working on trying to make sure that we have the truth about things that are being said today, also have to accept some of the responsibility for allowing someone who wasn't telling the truth, but who was just sort of amusing. They helped create that person. That didn't answer your question, but
I think it did. I think it did. I think oftentimes we are so in search of clicks or entertainment or ratings that we go along with things that we know we shouldn't, but there are certain rewards in the industry for it.
Well, I'm not even sure that we know we shouldn't. I wouldn't say that it was that, okay, we're giving him this much space or we're giving certain things this much. It was amusing. It was amusing. And that was, a way of breaking up the otherwise serious news. And so we all have to, I think, I'm no longer in a position of decision-making and responsibility, although I do like to make a contribution as often as I can. But there needs to be, like at the New York Times right now, the New York Times is undergoing a serious, my former employer, and occasionally now they'll publish me, but they are undergoing a serious analysis of where they are on diversity and inclusion, because, what's interesting to me is that when I worked at the New York Times in the 70s, we had the same issue and we sued the paper because the Black reporters and the women reporters weren't making the same money and getting the same promotions as some of the, as the others who were not people of color or women. And here we are, that was in the 70s. And here's the New York Times once again having the same issue. What goes around comes around. So conscious people who understand our Constitution and who are dedicated to keeping our country on the path towards a more perfect union have to keep themselves informed. You cannot retire. You have to keep working because you got the right ideas about things. I'm just not letting you off the hook.
That's okay. I can't afford to retire. I keep working.
Jack, thank you very much for these questions. I would like now to introduce Mandy Costa. And Mandy Costa is one of the founding members of the New Bedford Light. She is also a retired Navy and currently working for the US Department of Labor, where she investigates discrimination against women and minorities. Welcome, Mandy.
Hi, thank you. Ms. Hunter-Galt, thank you so much. I am also honored to be here to sit on this panel with you. And you touched on so many things that I work with on a day-to-day basis in fairness, equality, and and we investigate federal contractors, and we look at their hiring practices and their promotion practices, terminations, and we look at their salaries to make sure that everybody's being treated fairly and equitably across the board. And unfortunately, I'm still employed. I say unfortunately because that's, we hate to find discrimination the way that we do. It still exists. A lot of people don't believe that, of course, but unfortunately it does. And that's our job, is to investigate and to see if we can correct the wrongs in our day-to-day lives. But my question is touching on what Mr. Spillane had just also asked, and I'm gonna just paraphrase something you had said recently. The Freedom Rides were the first ones to get international attention, but we also need is what John Lewis and so many others did once they finished protesting, and they went down to the communities and they worked hard and they went face to face to get people to register to vote. And I think this past election especially, we saw that a lot of people really, really worked hard to get new children, not children, but teenagers registered to vote. And that was so important. And especially with Black Lives Matter this past summer, seeing the activities that we did and to actually see firsthand the teenagers and the young adults that were out there and fighting to have their voices heard. So what advice can you offer to these newly registered peaceful protesters so that their concerns are heard and not distorted by the media and shared honestly, so that their truths are heard and not twisted?
Well, I have a question for you, but let me answer yours first, because I want to ask you why you think you're still having the challenges that you're having. But let me try to answer your question while it's still in my mind, because at 79, I forget things very quickly.
How do I?
Let me say again how I cannot stress enough how important our history is, especially for our younger generation now, who are moving in a new and different time, but against some of the same issues that the John Lewis and Julian Bond and Judy Richardson and all of those, Joyce Ladner, all of those young people who were in the vanguard of the civil rights movement, they need to know that history. And I remember I was at the New Yorker around when I was there in 67, 68, and Julian Bond, whom I had known as a college student, by this time he had won a seat in the Georgia legislature, and he had come to New York to give a talk. and I went to hear the talk, and I had a few words with him before that I threw into the little article I wrote. But then he said something that I put into the article, and I came across it again the other day, and I just think it was really profound. And even though our younger generation today are coming up with new and different ways and are more inclusive, but our civil rights movement was also inclusive. Don't forget that. There were white people who died fighting for us. And there were young people of all colors and races who I remember when John Lewis got ready to leave Washington on one of those freedom rides, he and the mixed race group of students who were going with him all signed their wills before they left, because they had no idea what they were going to encounter and whether or not they were going to make it. And of course, as I said a few moments ago, some of them didn't. But my point is to go back to Julian. He said, this was 1968. He said, now we have made our case nationally and been out on the stage around the country and even around the world. He said, we made the point, but now it's time for us to get off the national stage and go back to our communities and work there to ensure that people understand the importance of voting, that people are registered to vote, that if it's like the COVID crisis now, which is so disproportionately affecting people of color, and the voting was the same then as it is now. And so I find that lesson from history, from Julian's mouth, is a lesson we need to be teaching today. It's one thing to go to DC and march peacefully, or to march peacefully in your communities or your states. It's much harder to go back and every day go out and talk to people, help educate people, and help them understand the importance of participating in the democratic process, the importance of being informed, how they can become informed. They can become informed through things like the New Bedford Light, and how limited some of the information vehicles that they have, how limited they are. It's okay to use Twitter. I use it. It's okay to use these, shorthand things, but that's not going to give them the kind of information they need to be good citizens. And to go back to the earlier question from Jack, how they can inform themselves in a way that helps narrow the divide. And I think that, there's an election coming up, midterm. I'm very tempted, even during the COVID, I just had my second vaccination, so it might be all right for me to do this. I'm just so tempted to go out into the various communities and ask people how they're feeling about voting. Has anybody come to them to talk to them about the issues, about the midterms, which are a bit away, but are you registered? And then the other thing that was amazing to me, I wrote an article that got published in the New Yorker the day before the election, this past election. And it was about the number of Black men who were voting for the incumbents, let's put it that way. And the reasons, many of them were unable to vote because they had been in prison, and you have to have been out of prison 5 years in order to get the papers and register and so forth. But when I asked them who would they vote for, it wasn't Joe Biden and Kamala, except Harris, except that one brother told me that he couldn't vote because he hadn't been out quite 5 years. But he said, But if I could, I would like to see the ticket reversed. In other words, he was saying he wanted, and I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, I want to see the woman on top, which I thought was pretty good. But
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
rest of the conversation was very disconcerting because it was a lack of good information that these young men had. So it's really important for people who have connections in the streets and in the communities to be out there now, not 5 days before the election.
Right. Got it. Thank you.
But you
I-
gotta
I-
answer my question.
Sure.
Why do you think you're coming across these issues you mentioned regarding labor?
You know, it's a very good question. And what we investigate is systemic discrimination. So it's unfortunate, but I have to say that as time goes by, our cases are getting bigger and bigger. And, you know, we're finding more and more class members, excuse me, more and more class members. And what we, in my particular agency, we're looking at discrimination against women, minorities, individuals with disabilities, and veterans. And we see it in alarming rates. We really do. And it just hasn't, I've been with the agency now for almost 16 years, and I see just as much discrimination as I did when I started.
Why do you think that
So
is?
I don't know. I really wish I knew the answer to that question. I really don't know. It's just now that there's the contractors are being forced to pay larger amounts of money based on that discrimination. But I don't know. I want to say, I think that as an investigator, I think that we're getting smarter and we're able to infiltrate a little bit further because of the experience we've had and going and asking the right questions and probing and running the right regression statistical analysis. So we're able to really to hone in on that. Maybe that's why, but the discrimination hasn't gone away. It definitely hasn't. We've just gotten, I think, a lot smarter on how we investigate it.
But did we get more complacent because we thought
Oh,
we
absolutely,
won the
absolutely,
battle?
absolutely, absolutely. And I think a lot of people, especially our class members, don't realize that they are victims until we let them know at the end of our investigation that you are a class member, and they're like, I didn't realize that I was being discriminated against. And we're having to tell them that, yes, you have been. You've been underpaid compared to your white counterparts. Or you didn't receive that promotion as compared to your male counterparts.
And they didn't.
So, right, they don't know that until after we finish our investigations and we have these large lists of class members that are victims to systemic discrimination. So yes, it continues. And like I said, I just think we're getting a lot smarter. But unfortunately, the smarter we get, the smarter they get. So it's a circle. It's circular, unfortunately. But I think we're getting better at it, though.
Good.
We are getting better at it.
That's good to hear.
Thank you, Mandy. And thank you for your comments as well, in addition to Charlene's answers. Certainly highlights the need for more transparency as well, right? In a lot of these jobs and positions. But no more commentary from the moderator, I promise.
Why not? Why not? It's okay.
we may get there. I would like to now introduce Sarah Weisberg. Sarah is UMass Dartmouth's Journalism Alliance Jacobs Graduate Fellow in the Program for Professional Writing and Communication. Sarah?
Hi, Ms. Undergall. It is an honor to be on this panel with you. And I would just like to take a moment to thank the Jacobs Family Advised Fund at the South Coast Community Foundation, because without them, I would not get to do this. So thank you very much. What I would like to know is, as a student, when you began at the University of Georgia, and there was a fair amount of, I'm assuming, racial tension. How did you find a way to not only transcend that, but to use it to become the successful journalist that you are? And is that how you got your perspective on disinformation and a search for the truth when there was no racial equality?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for your own work. It's great to meet you and hear you and know that you're doing good things out there.
I'm trying.
Well, it's the best we can all do is try. I have said this before, but I'm going to say it again because I think it's the absolute truth. I grew up in the segregated South, where the powers that be promoted what they call separate but equal, which was a lie. It was separate and very unequal. But I also grew up, and I can't say this enough, even before I had been in Africa and learned the phrase, it takes a village to raise a child. That was what I grew up with. While the white establishment was trying to make us feel unequal and believe it, I think it was our history going back to, I don't know how far back, maybe to the 1500s when we first came over, and that history was passed down. But that village, when they couldn't give us first-class citizenship, they gave us a first-class sense of ourselves. And so even though I went to a segregated elementary school that we got the hand-me-down books from the white schools, and often pages would be missing. And I'm not even going to go there to tell you what we used to have in the cafeteria because it wasn't very healthy. Although I kind of liked it, but it wasn't Michelle Obama's healthy food for young people. But the point was that at that school, they taught us our history. And they also, I'll tell you a real quick story. They used to have a fundraiser once a year to help make up for those deficits due to the segregated system. And whichever family, everybody in the community was involved. I had an uncle who had girlfriends all over town, and my mother knew all of them. And so she would go to them using my uncle's name, and one was a hairdresser and she would contribute, and somebody else was something else and she would contribute. And so one night we're at this fundraiser, it's the end of the fundraising, and everybody's there who participated. All of the students like me are trying to wait and see who gets to be, because whichever family raised the most money, their child would be crowned king or queen. That particular night, I looked over and I saw my mother and grandmother taking out their little handkerchiefs, undoing the pennies and nickels and dimes they had collected. And there came a point when they had to announce who was the king or the queen. And that particular night, I'll never forget it after all these years, they said, and our new queen is Charlayne Hunter. And I got a bull of a watch and a diamond tiara. Well, I put on that tiara. I got a picture of it somewhere around here. I won't get it now. But I put on that, oops, sorry, I thought I had turned this off. Let me turn this off. I'm gonna have to call you back because I'm on a very important meeting. Anyway, they announced my name and put the crown on. And I'm gonna tell you something. I can tell you now. I was insufferable to my classmates for the next few days because I would wear that crown every day. But eventually they teased me so badly that I stopped wearing the crown. But when I've been asked about the day that I walked onto the campus of the University of Georgia and all of these students were yelling, you know what, go home, bad word. I was looking around for that person, that N-word person, because I knew who I was. I was still a queen. That notion that I was a queen had taken up residence in my head. Now, sometimes I can be unbearable because of that, even today. Ask my husband. But, but no, I'm serious though. It was their way of giving us a feeling of first-class citizenship, despite the fact that the system. So when I got to the University of Georgia, I was determined to live out my dream of following in the footsteps initially of Brenda Starr, whom I learned about in the funny papers. But because of our history lessons, I learned about Ida B. Wells and all of the pioneering Black women journalists. So it was my focus on my future and the crown that I wore that made me feel almost ordinary in those extraordinary circumstances. And also, I mentioned earlier that I'm a person of faith. Now, I'm a preacher's kid, so that is part of it. My grandfather was also a preacher. My grandmother was the saint. And while my grandfather was the preacher, the saint, my grandmother, used to make me learn Bible verses. And so the third night that I was on campus, the students rioted outside my dorm. They threw rocks and Coca-Cola bottles through the window because I was on the first floor all by myself. The other students had been were up on the second floor. And at a certain point, the dean came and said I was being suspended, quote unquote, for my own safety. And so there were pictures of me coming out of the dorm that night into a dark night where the rioters had been dispersed, albeit belatedly, but they've been dispersed with tear gas. And so the journalists, the next day, we'd been whisked back to Atlanta, my colleague Hamilton Holmes and I, he's now an ancestor, much too early. But anyway, we got whisked back to New York, to Atlanta. And the next day, the media people, journalists were saying, oh man, it must have been really scary. And I said, no, it wasn't scary. And I hadn't really focused on why it wasn't scary. But when they pressed me, it came like that crown, invisible crown. Here was this invisible lesson that my grandmother had taught me from the Bible. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. It's amazing when they tell you, teach your children right. And when they are old, they will never depart from you. And if you give them what I call armor, like that's armor that she gave me. I got other kinds of armor too, but that was armor that shielded me and protected me from whatever hurt, harm, or danger there might have been out there. And it kept my mind, as the song, old civil rights song goes, stayed on freedom, my freedom.
I really like that. And as far as the Bible verse goes, I actually have that tattooed on me. I do, yeah, Psalm 23:4.
Take a picture and send it to me, okay?
I will for sure.
I have a lotus tattooed on my arm, but I'm not going to show that.
Well, we can do a tattoo tour, but some other time. But that's fascinating, and I really like the analogy of the crown, and I think that's really fascinating. And thank you.
But thank you very much.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Charlene. That was an incredible story of inner fortitude, and I anyway resonated with me tremendously. Thank you. I would now, yeah, I would now like to invite those in attendance to please submit questions for our chat, because we will open up the rest of the meeting for questions from our attendees. We already have a few in waiting, so I will get started with those. But if you haven't submitted yet and you have a question that you just would love to pose to Charlene Hunter-Gauld, please submit it through the Q&A, which should be at the bottom of your screen, in the middle to the right. I'm bad at directions quite clearly. That's what my husband tells me as well.
Well,
I mean,
I see my daughter got her hand up, so if you don't call on her, all of us will be.
I am, however, an excellent driver and parallel parker, just for the record. So please, the way to get your questions included is to submit them through the Q&A, okay? So from our attendees, I will probably open with a question from a student from UMass Dartmouth, because it's very much speaks, it's a good segue to the topic and to the story that you were telling us just now about your experience at the university and what inspired you to become a journalist. And this question came from Ryan Davis at UMD, and he said, I read your father served in the US Army and that you became interested in journalism at a very young age from a comic strip called Brenda Star Reporter. What was your father's opinion about you wanting to become a journalist? Did he want you to follow him and join the Army as well? What kind of influence and inspiration did your parents have on your career as a journalist? And you already started telling us a bit of that.
Right. That's a very good question. And I'm very proud of my father and other members of my family, including my brother and uncle, all of whom served. And, you know, my father served. I'm so proud of him because he served well. He was a chaplain. When he finally retired, he was a lieutenant colonel. And my father fought, well, he didn't fight because he was a chaplain, but he served during World War II and was on the battlefield. And there were times when he had to give the final rites to Black soldiers who were dying on the battlefield for a country that did not recognize them as first-class citizens. And that's how great our history is, because what was it that caused so many of them to sign up and go and defend this country when the country did not defend them? But no, my father never, he always embraced me. And I think he got this from his mother, who is the one who gave me those wonderful Bible verses. So did my other grandmother as well, my mother's mother. But he respected women, and he respected my ambition. And so he supported me in what I wanted to do. And he would come home on furlough, you know, not often. He wasn't home very often, but whenever he would come, whatever I was up to, he would support, except for one thing. My father, once he came home, and I've always had good grades most of the time, unless it was, I'm not going to tell you when I didn't get good. My daughter and I have the same problem with numbers. She told me what the term is. I think it's called dyscalculia or something like that, but I've never been good at numbers. But he came home, and I had a report card that I was so proud of. It had 5 A's and a B+. My father's eyes went right past those 5 A's, and he said, excuse me, but what is this B+? I said, it's in math, Dad, and I'm just not good. He said, excuse me. And I was getting ready to explain this. I didn't know the term dyscalculia at the time, but I mean, I thought it was pretty good that somebody that had the problems I had with numbers had gotten a B+ in math. You know what my father said? And again, this is how our families built armor, created armor. My father said, first-rate minds don't get B+. I was so upset with him. It took me years to appreciate what he had just said, but he was inspiring me to be the best I could be. And he didn't make it racial. This was about me being a good person who could achieve my ultimate ambition. And you know, it had been what he had been taught by his parents. it's just amazing what parents of color used to teach their children in order to help them survive the system. And his father, my grandmother, the one who taught me those Bible verses, returned to school after she had had these two boys. They were in the first, second, or third grade. And who was in the second or third grade with them? Their mother. And I said to my father once, or maybe it was my uncle, I said, well, how did you feel about your mother being in the same grade as you in elementary school? He said, we were so proud. You know, education has always been such an important thing for us. He said, my grandfather used to tell them, now this is really important, and this is what we should be teaching our children now, because it's still relevant. He said, get an education, boys, because that's going to be the key to your liberation. And even though we're dealing with systemic racism and as the sister was saying a few minutes ago, we're dealing with, Ms. Costa was saying that we're still dealing with discrimination in the workplace. It's important for us to know that we are qualified so that we will have the strength to challenge when we're not getting those promotions that we should be getting because of our abilities.
I love the message of education being a key to liberation. I think that's a message that resonates intersectionally, right, across.
Absolutely.
Right. I was listening to you and I was thinking of my own family's experience. I'm a first generation college student. You know, my parents grew up under a dictatorship in Portugal, and they only got access to fourth grade educations. That bound their future, right? I mean, they were working by the ages of 11, 12. I mean, working in factories, you know. Yeah. And the transition that came for my generation, born after, you know, that right-wing dictatorship in Portugal, was incredible, right? It was freeing, but education was, at least in my personal history and in the some of my colleagues and in my experience, very much the key to access, right? The key to being able to make the jump that was impossible for previous generations.
Right.
So
That's
access
wonderful.
to yeah.
That's great to know. I wouldn't have known that looking at you and thinking, oh, here's this very successful college professor.
Well, I like to remember my students that I am a first generation college student and that my grandparents were literally illiterate peasants, because that was our world up until the mid 70s. And it's hard to think about that in Western Europe, but it is the truth. It was the truth for so many Portuguese like me, right? Yeah. And like my family. But again, enough about me.
No, never.
We have multiple questions coming here, but I absolutely, I think that's a very potent message for everyone, right? The bet on education. And I love that your father had that vision for you as well.
Yeah.
So we have a question here from Gail Davidson. She said, there are programs in Scandinavia to teach very young children how to monitor the news that comes in on social media to discern the real from the fake. Are you aware of any such programs in the United States?
And just repeat the first part of that again.
So programs in Scandinavia.
Yes,
to teach very young children to monitor the news. And to distinguish good versus bad content.
Oh, well, that would be a good op-ed. I think you should write that and get it in some place that lots of people would read it, because I've not heard of anything like that. But I think that's amazing. And you know, the thing is that Martin Luther King once talked about our world, and he said, you know, we live in we exist in a single garment of destiny. And it is the case that while so many of the advanced democracies are advanced democracies, there are things that we can learn from these from everywhere. And here's a great example. If that exists in the United States, and I don't know everything that exists here, if that doesn't exist, it's a great thing to put out there. And I would encourage the questioner to do a little investigation. And if she finds or he finds that there's no such program here, write an op-ed and say it should happen. It's a great idea.
I agree. And potentially another good story for the New Bedford Light to
Exactly.
think about covering as well.
Sure.
I see we are getting a lot of questions, and if you're in attendance and you're sending questions, I hope I get to all of your questions, but if I don't, apologies. A question from Michael Dyer. Michael Dyer says, journalism obviously matters. Can you comment on the difference between hard news and the editorials?
Yeah, I'm happy to do that because I think that nowadays there's a lot of criticism about journalists taking positions, and we are in a very challenging time, shall we say, because there's so much misinformation and so many lies out there and disinformation that even journalists who are not editorial writers sometimes have to correct bad information. And it makes it seem like they're taking a position, and sometimes they do. So, and I worry a little bit about that, but I do think it's important for journalists, responsible journalists, to correct misinformation and disinformation. But editorial writers exist to give their opinions. Op-ed writers exist to give their opinions. And I'm hoping, and I hope that that practice has been around long enough that people do understand the difference between what's on the editorial page or what's in the editorial comment on a radio program or a television program. Like you mentioned earlier that I work part-time sometimes for the PBS NewsHour. And on Friday nights, they have two commentators, David Brooks and, oh God, his name he's gonna kill me. Oh shucks, his name just went out of my head. Anyway, the two of them come on and they give their opinions. And it's very important to have that because it's clear that they are giving opinions. And yet the rest of the program attempts to provide what they continue to insist is news that the public can use. Jonathan Capehart, thank you, dear God, for helping me remember, because Jonathan would kill me if he heard.
You are better with names than I am, because I knew exactly who you were talking about and couldn't think of the name either.
Right. Jonathan Capehart. He took the place of Mark Shields, and they both were very good. And what's interesting is that in these challenging times, even though they're supposed to represent opposite ends of the spectrum in terms of opinion, it's so interesting. I find them agreeing more than they disagree. And if if they do disagree on something, it's a minimal disagreement. That's the kind of time that we're in, so that people who inform themselves about the issues, even if they're at let me not go off on that track. Let me just say that the difference is that editorial writers, and that's why you have an editorial page, so people know that these are people expressing their opinions. That's why you have an op-ed page. And it's sometimes getting difficult these days because we are in a transitional moment in everything. Sometimes the news articles get a little bit personal in a way. I mean, and I'm saying, wait a minute. And I know it's a change in time, and I'm bringing my many years of practicing this craft to my analysis of what I'm seeing. But you know, I think history shouldn't have changed what we do. I always remember, and I quote Edward R. Murrow, who talked about, and you know how half of the people on this program, maybe 3/4 of them, don't even have a clue who Edward R. Murrow was, but he was a great journalist. He was a statesman of journalism. And even though it was many years ago that he lived and said this, his words resonate today. And he was talking about television, but I think it is applicable to print media and also these other forms that we have now. He said of television, but I say it of journalism, this instrument can teach, it can illuminate, it can inspire, but it can only do so to the extent that human beings are willing to use it to those ends. Otherwise, it's merely lights and wires in a box. And I think that you can take that and apply it to print, to electronic media. You can apply it to every media that exists. But it comes back to what he said, and the thing I learned from Jim Lehrer and Robert McNeil, they put it in words, I believed it always. But when I got there, they had put it in these words: we produce news that can be used by people to make good decisions about their lives. And that's the difference between editorials, which also can help people, but you know, then they have to analyze what the editorialists are saying. And those of us who try to give you straight news that you can use so that you and not I can make the decision about what's best for your life.
Thank you. I am seeing a comment here, which is not a question, so I will share it. And then I will move on to the next question. This is a comment coming from Kevin Galligan. And he says, Charlene, you are wonderful for being on this program with us. Your words about the need to listen are so important. It takes work to listen in an unbiased way and realize not every situation is black and white, binary, on and off, after all. After all, aren't there many colors and shades of color in the rainbow? As a gay local elected official here in Cape Cod with a supportive husband and a community, I think we all need to be excited to listen, learn, and lead. Thank you. I think he shares the sentiments of a lot of people in the room right now.
Oh, that's so, thank you.
Thank
And
you.
congratulations on your position.
We also have a message from Justine Dunlap that said that she remembers fondly your reporting from years of listening to NPR. Here's a question on listening as well, since the comment went for it. And this question comes from Crystal, and she says, your message is listen to others, yet from local to national venues, people listen to their own truths, that is beliefs. Thus, we appear now to live in a world of conflicting and relative truth. So how do we determine truth in a stovepipe environment?
That's a challenging question. I mean, I think that's what we're all struggling with these days, even those of us who try to provide our listeners, viewers, readers with good information and news that they can use. Look, I think that we have a tremendous responsibility as communicators. But let me also say that I think our public has some responsibility too, to educate themselves and to you know, maybe like even my husband, listen to things that you know you don't agree with, just so you can understand it, because how else are you going to confront it? You really need to know what people are thinking. And I think that we are in a very challenging time. a time of uncertainty about where we're going from here. I mean, look at the COVID. I mean, today we hear all the news is about Johnson's vaccine. But then, I have a good friend who's here visiting, and she's a doctor and an expert on COVID. She's on panels every day on it, Dr. Helene Gale. And she knows a lot about this. At the same time, she and others who are honest about this situation, who know, say you don't know everything. And so how do we learn about, let me give you this example. How do we learn about the reaction to the vaccine? Everybody's wants to get the vaccine because they think that's going to keep them from transitioning to another world, right? What do? How do you find out about it? You read about it. You read everything that anybody has written about it. You listen on the radio or you watch television. Don't tell me that you are not trying to find out every single thing you can find out about COVID. Do that about everything else. Apply the kind of attention that you're paying to how you stay alive to how you live in a world with other people. Some of it is hard work, and we have to be willing not to. I mean, journalists exist to help inform the people, but the people have some responsibility too. And I think that this COVID crisis gives us an excellent opportunity to examine how we function in our society. It has, well, there are racial aspects because there are tremendous disproportionate impact on people of color, especially poor people and older people who don't have computers or who have trouble working on trying to figure out how to get online and sign up for one of these for these injections. But if you have spent time trying to keep yourself alive because of this pandemic, apply that to keeping yourself alive otherwise and informed. It's work. Being a citizen is not easy. And so I can't tell you how to inform yourself, how best to inform yourself. I can just share with you, some of the things I think are important, but I also think it's important to commit yourself to working hard to get good information. And just like you're getting information about COVID from a variety of sources, get information about our democracy and how we go forward from a variety of sources, because I'm sure everybody on this call today is an intelligent person, no doubt about it. Whether you finished college or in college or never went to school or whatever, you learn how to use your computer, right? You're on this call. So, let's work at it a little bit. Let's be willing to work at it. And let's be willing to help other people work at it. And this is a hard one. Let's be willing to talk to people who don't agree with all of our positions. That's what Dr. Crutcher talked about and how important it was. And go to PBS NewsHour and look up Dr. Ronald Crutcher, because he spoke to young people, but his advice was not just for young people. It was for people who want to be good citizens, but who live in a world where people have different ideas and attitudes, and who don't see eye to eye. So how do you bring them together? Can't always do it, but you can give it a shot.
That's,
Or two shots.
Another very powerful message, Charlene. And I am told right now that your daughter would like to pose a question to
Uh-oh.
you.
Uh-oh.
So Susan has joined us, and given the timing, this will probably be our closing question. So no pressure, Susan.
All
Oh,
right.
you are muted. Susan, we can't hear you. Make sure that you unmute. Thank you.
Exactly a question. I'm just here. I didn't really intend to be on this call like that, but hi, mommy.
Hey, baby, and thank you. Look, you see my birthday present?
The ring.
Okay.
Anyway, this has been an awesome conversation, and I think the questions that have been posed by the students and the grown-ups have all been awesome. And I am just very excited to be part of the solution.
You have a question?
Nope, I told you I didn't have a question. I
Ah.
knew you'd
Oh, okay.
call. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
I'm still here. I just didn't really, I don't want to be on this thing. I don't know how I got on. All right.
It's great
I'm
to
not
see you.
leaving.
I've been missing you in person, but it's great to see you on Zoom. You know, this must really be an important program because my daughter does not do Zoomers. But it's been important just to hear from people and to hear what's on their minds. And I've just been inspired by this. I really have. And I'm so grateful that you've done this and we persisted for a whole.
Well, thank you from us. I think we may have a moment for a final question, but I saw that Jeannie was coming on. Did you want to interject, Jeannie, please?
Yes, I did, because Charlene, we were able to get you on today, and with all the little difficulties we had, I want to thank you so much, because I've been getting so many texts and emails as you have been on, telling me that how wonderful, how appreciative everybody is that you was able to join us today. Your words were impactful. Your presence was, just wonderful having you here. So thank you from the community of New Bedford and abroad, because I did have my cousin on from Paris last time. I think she's on this time. And some people from Cape Verde, and Daniela, you had some people from Portugal, I believe. So
I did, in fact.
that's how important you are.
Well,
But
thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Charlene. And happy birthday once again.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Okay.
Thank you, Jeannie. I see Susan has her hand up. Susan, would you like to add something?
If you have another, I'm happy to take another question from the audience if you want, but you running it, so it's up to you.
Absolutely.
I've been energized by this conversation.
It's been and your answers have been so so well-rounded and so thoughtful. Let me select one more question. Let me tell you, we have received a tremendous number of questions. So once again, if I don't get to your personal question, I'm very sorry that that I didn't make it. But I will. So here's one question from Serena Silva. And Serena says, how do journalists or any purveyors of truth correct conspiratorial misinformation while also adequately acknowledging the past traumas that tend to prompt such skepticism? I work in clinical research, and I find when talking to my community about the vaccine, there is so much misinformation about its safety and efficacy that is influenced by the very real traumas of the past and present. Think Tuskegee, Henrietta Lacks, current discrepancies in healthcare.
Yes, it's interesting. My husband wrote an article about this recently, and he cited the Tuskegee syphilis experiment and other things that have made people skeptical. And he wrote this as a member of a Black male organization, the Boule, to help them appreciate the concern that so many people have about it, and it's historic, this concern, but to encourage them, just like I was saying at the beginning of this conversation, and I'm amazed I can remember what I said at the beginning of the conversation, but we have to get out and work among our people, with our community. And that was what he was doing. He was encouraging these brothers to go out and talk to other brothers and some of their mothers, to help them appreciate that this is not another Tuskegee syphilis experiment, because that exists. That misinformation exists, or that concern exists, especially among older people of color. And so I think that we all have a responsibility. You know, I often have to stand back and remind myself of who I am, because I am, first of all, I'm old now. So I'm considered, as South Africans say, an elder. I'm a woman. I'm a Black woman. I'm a wife, a mother, and a friend. And so I have to sometimes, when I'm writing, have to remember, now, wait a minute. What are you writing as? Are you writing as a journalist? Are you writing as a wife? And I'm writing a book right now, which I hope will be out by the end of the year. And it's called My People. And it's about the pieces that I've written about Black women, about civil rights pioneers, about others. And I think that I have maintained a professional, my professionalism. And yet at the same time, I've been informed by who I am. And I can't escape that. So while I tried, and that's why I reject the term objective, because I'm not my computer. My computer will often misspell a word that I've spelled correctly, and I have to change it, but I'm not my computer, I'm human. So, and it's like, there's another point about the media. As humans, we make mistakes. But the good newspapers and the good communication instruments will very quickly correct a mistake, will admit it, and will correct it. And I think people have to understand that we're not perfect, we're human. But I believe in fairness and balance as opposed to objectivity. And I can't escape that I'm all those iterations that I just delineated: a woman, a Black, an elder now, a mother, a sister. And so I bring all that to bear. And yet when I do write articles, I try to bring my journalistic training and experience to bear and not step over the line, unless I say I'm writing now an opinion. I'll identify it as an opinion.
Very good. Charlene, would you like one more question, or do you feel ready to wrap up?
No, I'm fine.
So perhaps one final question, and hopefully one that will end us in a positive note. And I think, in fact, I can see from your answers, at least this is how I'm reading them, that you are an eternal optimist. Right?
Yes.
I mean, you seem to you radiate that energy about you, and even when we're talking about this sometimes disconcerting issues and issues about tensions in our society, I can see that positivity comes through your answers.
Well, thank you.
So this is a question from Rebecca Barnes, and it will be our last question for today. She says, as a journalist, do you think about the communities you inform as well as you think about the individuals? I ask because when arriving as a new resident in New Bedford, I realized I couldn't get a sense of the diverse and range of people, interests, events, activities, politics, because the local news coverage was extremely limited. The health of a community of people seems to be nurtured by shared information. has this perspective affected your work? And I perhaps even add to that and say, you know, in what ways can local news nurture the community? I think Rebecca's question is also leading to this.
Right. Well, the thing is that I think that we really do have to figure out one of the biggest challenges we have right now, which is how we preserve local news. Because I saw somewhere we lost 1,800 newspapers in the last 10 years. And a lot of the local newspapers are losing support. There's no more classified ads and things like that. So I think that we really have to work hard at getting good information, especially at the local level, and figure out how we can continue to support our local community newspapers. If it's, I don't know how you all do it at the New Bedford Light, but you've got to educate. I hope you're educating, and I'm sure you are educating your community to how they can support you. And here's something, I'm going to leave you with this. It's an example. I was Harlem bureau chief for a number of years for the New York Times. And it was the first time they had ever established a bureau in a community in America, especially in a Black community. And one day the Black Panthers, you've just probably all seen the recent movie about the Black Panthers, so you know what positions they were taking. And so they had just come from the West Coast where they had been in a lot of trouble, violence and so forth. And they were trying to reestablish give a different image to themselves. So they started this breakfast program for young people. And so they called a press conference. And so I go over because I got my credentials and everything. And I show up and I say, okay, I'm here. I'd like to come. And he said, and he looked at my credentials and he said, no, you can't come in here. I said, excuse me, why not? He said, because you work for the man, meaning the New York Times. And I said, well, why is that a problem? Well, because the man ain't never told the truth about us. And I said, well, let me ask you something. There's another thing. If you're a journalist, you got to have some chutzpah. I said, have you ever read anything I've written? He said, no. I said, let me make one deal with you. I said, let me come in and cover this press conference about your breakfast program. And if what I write, what you read in the newspaper tomorrow is not an accurate reflection of what went on here, don't let me come to your next press conference. How about that? He thought about it for a couple of minutes and he said, okay, on one condition. Now here's where you have to also listen to your sources. It was something I believed in, but he put it in a phrase that has stayed with me these many years. He said, all right, I'm gonna let you come in this time on one condition. I said, what is that? All right, everybody get your pencil out because you want to remember this. I said, what is that condition? He said, you got to come in right. Now think about that. That applies to the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Boston Globe. It also applies to the New Bedford Light. You got to come in right, which means understanding who you're dealing with and how best to convey their story. I have traveled all over this world covering wars and the Ebola crisis and AIDS and you name it. And right with me was that Black Panther. You got to come in right. That will get you where you need to go. And if you tell your people who are working for the New Bedford Light to come in right, you will shine.
I I can only tell you that our greatest aspiration is to come in right, and to do right by our community. And we're working very hard towards that end. We hope to be publishing a little later this year. Right now, our presence is only on social media, but we will have a formal page. And one of our great projects, I don't know if you're already aware of this or not, Charlene, is to create a journalism incubator for our community. And basically to run workshops, to run classes in which anyone from our community will be able to join and learn the nuts and bolts of journalism, of information, of reaching out and building these types of bridges. So our aspirations are high, and I think our goals are lofty. And your words are incredibly inspiring. So thank you so much.
Can I just
Jeannie.
say, yeah, I want to say, and absolutely, that resonates so much with me, Charlene, because that's why I'm a part of New Bedford Light, because I believe that the people that are involved in New Bedford Light are going to come in right. Absolutely.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And thank you so much. And Daniela, you have the last word.
Thank you. Thank you. I mean, I have so many thank yous right now. I thought this was an incredibly compelling and stimulating conversation. I can't thank you enough on behalf of the greater New Bedford community, of the University of Massachusetts Dartmouth, and of course of the New Bedford Light. You were an absolutely wonderful guest and a very patient one, especially after the technological mishap that we had last week. We are really in awe of the time and attention that you have given to us. I have heard that you like New Bedford, so I hope that sometime soon we may cross paths with you somewhere in New Bedford, enjoying. I don't know if you're a scallop person or not, but we have amazing ones around here.
Great.
I would also like to extend a thank you, because I probably won't have many opportunities to do this formally, to my fellow founding members at the New Bedford Light, because we have been working tirelessly for several months behind the scenes to make this nonprofit community news journalism, community news project come to fruition. We are almost at the finishing line, or really at the beginning for the public. And I just want to acknowledge them and to thank them for inviting me into this group and for working so hard to make this a reality. I want to thank the University of Massachusetts for co-hosting this event with us and being such wonderful partners. I want to thank everyone who came here today, and there are not enough thank yous for Charlene Hunter-Gault. So on that note, again, this was a wonderful conversation, and I trust that everyone here enjoyed it as well. And I see notes, I see thank yous coming from Lisbon as well right now, from all over the greater New Bedford area. It's been an incredible experience.
And continue to enjoy your birthday year.
Yes, I will. Thank you.
Love you, Charlene. Thank you.
Thank you.
Love you so much.
Thank you very much.